Dion watched Sena with joy. When the guy asked what he would do after lunch, the girl said that she would most likely go to the library to look for information about the demons that had appeared in the capital. Then the guy offered his help, but the girl hastened to refuse because she was embarrassed to rely on him so much. However, Dion, with a dazzling smile, reminded her that her arm was injured and she would most likely need his help. Sena to some extent agreed with him, so after some thought she agreed. After finishing lunch, they came to the library. Sena walked ahead and Dion followed, although this was not part of her plans. Originally, she was going to question the guards. However, with Dion, she would be very noticeable. In addition, he could help Sena meet with mages from the Adventurers Guild in the future. With an evil grin, she made plans for the future. The administrator greeted them at the library and asked them to show their IDs. Sena showed her D-rank hunter card. Dion also showed his document. The librarian was delighted with his beauty, but she quickly came to her senses and said that everything was in order with the documents and they could move on. However, the girl turned to Dion by the name Russell Dar. Hearing this, Sena began to look suspiciously at the guy. The administrator showed with a smile where the books on the desired topic were located. The heroine and Dion went in the indicated direction. Walking past the shelves, the guy was simply silent. At the same time, the girl was waiting for an explanation. With every silent step, her doubts only intensified. The girl's suspicions reached their peak. She came to the conclusion that Dion might be a fake. Feeling the guy's gaze on her, she turned in his direction. Under his gaze, she felt awkward and asked what was the matter. The heroine was shocked, thinking that Dion was going to reveal his true identity. The guy, after collecting his thoughts for a long time, said that he wanted to tell her the truth. The girl stood holding her breath, waiting for what the man would say. But the suddenly flushed Dion revealed that he hated libraries with all his heart. Obviously, this was not the truth that Sena expected. Then Dion embarrassedly explained that he could simply fall asleep while reading and asked the girl not to leave without him. The heroine was at a loss at such a request, but agreed. To dispel the awkward atmosphere a little and keep the conversation going, Sena suggested that Dione didn't particularly like books, to which the guy immediately responded that he simply hated them. Reina was extremely annoyed that Dion was taking this so seriously. Then the girl directly asked who Russell Durr was. The question was unexpected for the guy, but the girl, realizing that she had said too much, instantly covered her mouth with her hand, as if trying to return the words already spoken. Realizing that he was talking about the hunter's ID, which he showed, he calmly began to answer the question. He replied that the ID was made on the orders of his father, and he himself did not know who this name belonged to. The girl was distrustful of the answer and asked a counter-question about whether it would be easier to use her real name. Then Dion replied that the girl was, of course, right, but he was not registered as a hunter. The reason for this is that many people are wary of him since he is the eldest son of the head. For the same reason, they don't want him to become a hunter. Sena didn't even imagine this, but based on the fact that the father created a fake ID for his son, she decided that the head really cares about him. But the guy wasn't sure about this. Then the heroine noticed that as soon as she mentioned the chapter, his mood immediately deteriorated. Therefore, she decided not to talk about the chapter anymore and start searching for the right book. But her hand hurt more than she thought. Noticing this, Dion helped her get the chosen book. At that moment, he looked like a handsome prince from fairy tales. Sena took the book and thanked him for his help. It was Elliot Ruffman's work about telepathic demons. The heroine said that the scientist writer had been tracking and studying demons all his life, and was also the first to compile a bestiary of demons. She enthusiastically continued her story, saying that the demon she encountered in the basement last night was a telepath. After listening to the girl, Dion began to read the page on which the book was open. There, the author wrote about his experience of a collision with a demoness, about how he froze in place, rooted to the spot when she used her spell. Dion continued to read the story aloud, and according to the narrative. After that, she touched the scientist's lips with her tongue and began to slowly run her red nails along his thigh. But upon hearing this, Sena abruptly closed the book, not allowing him to finish the paragraph. The girl turned pale in shock, and only after looking at the book again did she notice the subtitle that the book was dedicated to the study of the seductive charms of succubi. She was embarrassed to even look in the man's direction. At the same time, Dion looked at her with a gentle and kind smile. While Sena's thoughts disappeared from embarrassment and she stood in a stupor, the guy called her. In order to help the heroine relax, he praised the author, saying that most likely the scientist was dedicated to his work. Although Sena was still extremely embarrassed, she still agreed with Dion's assumption. But she was still ashamed, so she covered her face with a book and asked the guy to sit and wait somewhere while she looked for information. Having said everything she was going to say, and not waiting for an answer, she quickly ran away. Dion didn't even have time to react. Moving away from the guy, Sena began to mentally curse Elliot Rathman for the shame he had experienced. After all, she admired him so much, listening to stories about how the scientist risked his life in the name of science. And in the end, he dedicated his work to succubi, describing in detail and in every detail his meetings with them. Having come to her senses a little, the girl noticed that she had been holding the book tightly all this time. After realizing this, she realized that her actions earlier may have created the wrong impression. This was a blow to her. The last thing she wanted was such misunderstandings. However, there was no point in worrying now because the guy had already formed the wrong impression about her. Therefore, Sena decided to just start reading. After reading a couple of pages, the girl noticed that although the book was vulgar, there was also useful information. In addition, the author organized all the information well. After flipping through several pages, Sena found the one she needed. There was information about the demon she had captured. There wasn't much information. According to data from the book, this demon is not typical for the area where the heroine lives and is not strong enough to break through the barrier of the capital. Based on this, the girl came to the conclusion that someone deliberately caught and released it there. Time flew by quickly while reading. Having finished with the books, Sena decided that it was time to return. And only standing up, she noticed that it was already sunset. She began to look around in search of Dion. Not finding him nearby, the girl ran to the side where they separated. Running between the shelves, she noticed a man in a cape. The stranger's purple hair caught her attention. She remembered Dion's story about the suspicious man who was following Ellen. Then, Sena assumed that this was the unknown person. While the heroine was watching him, the suspect hurriedly left somewhere. Having followed him, she saw that the stranger was entering the area with prohibited books. Then her fears intensified even more. After all, there was a high probability that an unknown person was watching Ellen with the aim of harming her. Therefore, in order to protect her neighbor, Sena began to keep an eye on the suspicious guy. But he just walked between the shelves. Since the use of magic in the library is prohibited, Sena was sure that if she had to fight with him, then victory would definitely be hers. The stranger abruptly changed his direction. The girl followed. But suddenly the man began to return. Noticing this, Sena stopped. To avoid getting caught, she also decided to turn back. But the steps were getting closer, and in panic, looking around, the girl began to look for a secluded place. Since there was no more time, she decided to hide behind the shelves. But before she could run away, someone suddenly grabbed her hand. An unknown force pulled Sena towards him. The frightened heroine resisted and tried to free herself, but when she heard Dion's voice, she instantly calmed down. Looking back, she saw that Dion was standing behind him. The man asked to be quiet and said that he would explain everything later. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice was heard. The purple-haired man addressed the middle-aged man, calling him my lord. The Marquis informed the guy with purple hair that Duke Carlman began to suspect something, and they needed to find Ellen first. Looking at Marquis Equils, Sena, little by little, began to remember the beginning of the novella that she had read in a past life. According to the plot, during her stay in the family of the Marquis, Ellen suffered a lot, and therefore she called all of them bad people, with the exception of the Marquis Eccles himself, since it was difficult to determine whether he was good or bad. The members of the Eccles house treated her inhumanely because she is an illegitimate child. But despite the fact that everyone hated her, there was one person who introduced her to room, clothes, food, and maids. This was the Marquis of Equiles. However, he never visited Ellen. Unlike other family members, the Marquis seemed unwilling to acknowledge Ellen's existence. Other children beat her. They openly mocked her. But the adults did not react at all. All this happened with the tacit consent of the head of the family. No matter how much his children and wife bullied Ellen, the Marquis never tried to stop them. But at the same time, he never tried to worsen her situation. everything was as if Ellen did not exist for him at all. However, in this case, it was unclear to Sena why he decided to find Ellen now. At the same time, she became convinced that the man with purple hair was the one who was watching her neighbor. Suddenly, the Marquis asked an unexpected question. He asked about the girl from the flower shop who looked a lot like Ellen. And the purple-haired guy's answer was even more shocking. He said that that girl was definitely not Ellen. Sena was confused, but Dion reminded her to be quiet since they were still hiding. Then the guy substantiated his conclusions to the Marquis. He said that when they came for the first time, the girl was indeed very kind and sweet, just like Ellen. But the second time, the girl attacked the subordinate guy with purple hair and drove him away. But that wasn't the only reason he claimed the girl wasn't Ellen. After listening to him, the Marquis asked about the main reason for this statement. Then the guy said that when they came for the third time, the girl drove them away in a rage. She furiously attacked them with a broom, swearing at them and calling them the most terrible words. Unable to listen to these vulgar words any longer, the noble gentleman ordered the story to end as he had already heard enough. Sena and Dion were also taken aback by Ellen's behavior. The heroine remembered her recent conversation with her neighbor. Then she taught Ellen to survive in this world. She told her that to live in this dangerous world, a girl needs to know a few bad words. Sena said curse words and taught Ellen to repeat them when necessary. After listening to the story of the guy with purple hair, the heroine realized that most of what Ellen said were words that she had taught. However, among everything Ellen said, there were curse words that Sena did not teach. Seeing Sena's expression, Dion couldn't help but laugh. Then the heroine abruptly covered his mouth with her hand, warning him in a quiet voice not to make any noise, otherwise they would be caught. After the guy's words, the Marquis was also convinced that the girl was not Ellen, because she would not express herself like that. Although the guy with purple hair agreed with this, he still said that he wanted to check everything again. But since Ellen had already seen him, he said that he would disguise himself. At this point, the guy finished his report. After those two left, Dion laughed a lot and asked how Sena even came up with the idea to teach Ellen swear words. The heroine was surprised, not understanding how the guy knew about this, but he explained that Sena had it all written all over her face. Then the girl explained that she taught it only for the purpose of self-defense, so that Ellen could use it against the Duke and his people. And although the girl used this knowledge under other circumstances, it still had an effect. These words made Dion even more cheerful. He also noted that it was undoubtedly effective. Then the embarrassed Sena said that since Dion liked everything so much, he should pay her. The guy liked this idea, and he rushed to look for the wallet. Seeing this, the heroine rushed to stop him, clarifying that she was just joking. Then Dion pretended that he did not understand this. However, a moment later he laughed again, saying that he was also joking. Looking at the guy's carefree laughter, Sena remembered something. She asked if Dion was worried. Seeing the confused expression on her friend's face, the girl clarified that the point was that the Marquis was looking for Ellen, and perhaps he would try to get her back. But the guy wasn't particularly worried about it. Sena found Dion's attitude too careless. Then, thinking that since Ellen lived next door, it would be unsafe for her if dangerous people were hanging around her neighbor, Sena decided that if push came to shove, she would kill them all. After all, their actions could affect her home too. Dion, as before, watched the heroine with tenderness in his eyes. Noticing the guy's gaze, Sena asked why he was looking. But the man only replied that he was simply at ease and having fun with her, which greatly surprised Sena. And to the heroine's question about what he was going to do after everything, Dion replied that he had not decided yet. The girl nodded automatically in response. But suddenly realizing, she asked in shock how he could not think about it, and what about his feelings for Ellen. The girl was simply dumbfounded by Dion's indifference. Having finished the conversation, the guy got up from the floor. He justified his behavior by the fact that Ellen was safe next to Sena, and offered, since they had already finished all the business in the library, to take her home. The heroine looked at him and did not understand what was wrong with him. The guy, holding out his hand, waited for her answer. The next day, Sena decided to consult with the administrator at the guild. After listening to her friend, Anna suggested that either the guy no longer loved that girl, or he simply decided to forget everything and move on. The heroine still did not understand why the guy made such a decision. However, in order not to arouse suspicion, I decided to end the conversation there. Observing the expression on Seina's face, Anna asked with a grin who she was talking about. The excited heroine replied that it was about his friend, but the astute administrator didn't believe it. Then the heroine decided to change the topic. She asked Anna if there was anyone from the investigative department in the department now. Hearing the question, the administrator began checking the documents. Having found the necessary document, she said that at the moment everyone had gone home. This looked very strange, so Seina immediately assumed that perhaps the Duke was deliberately preventing others from contacting this department. Anna also thought it was strange and said that perhaps there was some mistake in the documents. She invited her friend to go up and wait there, saying that the department was on the 3rd floor. Standing at the door, the heroine doubted whether to enter and suggested that perhaps the door was completely locked. However, the door opened easily. Looking at the open door, Seina was surprised that everything turned out so easily. A man sitting outside the door and checking some documents, seeing the girl, said that she had arrived earlier than he thought. Hearing this voice, Seina was discouraged. Dion sat in front of her. Raising his azure eyes, he looked at the heroine with a smile and showed that he had been waiting for her. Seina was extremely surprised to hear these words. Then Dion recalled that yesterday, on the way home, the girl told him that she would stop by the investigative department. After these words, Seina also remembered that conversation. However, the girl still did not understand how Dion was able to enter here at all, because usually, if no one is there, the doors are locked. Rising from his seat, the guy replied that he opened the door himself, and he took it out of his pocket and showed him the key to the lock. Seeing someone else's name on the keys, the girl turned pale. But Dion, with his usual smile, said that he had stolen the keys from the magician of the investigative department. Having said this, he handed the keys to her. The girl was simply shocked by how calmly he told all this. At that moment, Seina thought that today, Dion would act like a crazy bastard. They began to rummage through documents and reports, searching for the necessary information. Along the way, the heroine asked the guy if there was anyone in the office when he arrived. Dion replied that there was no one. Then Seina began to worry about what would happen to the owner of the key if they found out about the break-in. After thinking a little, the guy replied that most likely he would get a scolding from his boss. Hearing this, the heroine felt guilty towards the stranger, who would most likely be punished because of them. Therefore, Dion suggested finishing quickly and leaving. But no matter how much they searched, they could not find a report about a demon that had entered the Duke's house. After searching everything around, they came to the conclusion that the report had been hidden. Since the information is so secret, most likely even a direct question would not have any effect, so they decided to finish with the reports and come up with another way. Then Dion suggests getting out and leaving. In response, Seina asked if she could ask a question. Having received his consent, the heroine asked if he really gave up his feelings for Ellen. Hearing a positive answer, the girl opened her mouth in surprise. Dion added with a smile that he believed that Ellen would be better off with the Duke. Seina tried to console the guy, saying that he was a wonderful person. And although she didn't say exactly what she thought, she still said a lot of flattering words and said that he would definitely meet a wonderful person. Hearing the girl's kind words, gently touching Seina's hand, he asked her to make him feel better. At that moment, the guy's eyes were beautiful. His gaze was full of tenderness. Trying to answer at least something, the heroine said that she was not sure that she could make him laugh as much as yesterday. He did not expect such an answer. Dion couldn't help but laugh. It brought him to tears. Seeing the guy's reaction, Seina became even more embarrassed and, blushing, asked what she should do to help. Dion, still laughing, replied that it would be enough if she just stayed nearby. Based on the man's words, Seina decided that he meant that the girl should spend more time with him. And I came to the conclusion that Dion just needed a friend. Taking this opportunity, the man invited the girl to have a snack. But the girl was busy looking for work, so she was forced to refuse. Seeing the depressed expression on Dion's face, the heroine tried to change the subject. But because of Dion's puppyish appearance, Seina felt guilty. After some time, they put the room in order. Everything was perfectly tidy. Everything looked as if no one had been there. Having finished cleaning, Dion and Seina headed towards the exit. Suddenly, some steps were heard, and abruptly grabbing the guy, the heroine said that they needed to hide and wait until this man left. Having said this, Sena warily pressed Dion against the wall. The guy was embarrassed by such closeness, but the girl was focused on the steps. After some time, the footsteps died down, and she reported this to Dion. Realizing that they were safe, she exhaled with relief and looked angrily at Dion. Sena was angry that the guy was just trying to get out without thinking about the fact that they might get caught. Dion tried to justify himself, saying that in this case they could have lied, saying that they came here on business. But the answer did not satisfy the girl. She was furious, because it is obvious that no one would believe such nonsense. However, remembering that her boss's son was standing in front of her, Sena mentally calmed herself down. Coming closer, she asked as calmly as possible if Dion knew that he had a rather attractive appearance. She explained her words by describing the guy's appearance. His shiny silver hair, clear blue eyes, and damn attractive facial features stood out from the rest. And even that librarian was delighted with Russell Dorr. Hearing such a high assessment of his appearance, the guy involuntarily laughed. This made Sena furious again because she was talking about a serious topic. But the guy was glad to hear that the heroine thought he was handsome. In any case, he promised to be more careful in future. In return, he asked the girl to keep her promise and be there. Remembering their recent conversation, she agreed. Sena promised that she would try to keep her promise. The next morning, waking up from the knocking of doors, the sleepy heroine opened the door. A cheerful and happy Dion stood on the threshold. He happily invited the girl to dinner. The girl didn't think the guy would come so early, but given that it was already midday, Dion had no intention of leaving. He abruptly grabbed Sena's hand and pulled her along with him with a smile. The next day, Dion came again, but this time an hour later, he promised with puppy eyes that this time he would not forcefully drag her along with him. And a day later, the guy returned again. This time he invited Sena to the pastry shop. For a couple of days, he came every day and invited the heroine somewhere with a smile. This time, realizing that objections were pointless, she invited Dion to come in, since she needed to clean the house. The man immediately accepted the invitation and, thanking him, went into the house. Wiping off the dust, the heroine continued to think about the current situation and did not understand whether Dion was really going to come every single day. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Since Sena said that she was not expecting anyone today, Dion offered to open the door himself. Duke Carlman stood on the threshold. Seeing him, Dion sharply slammed the door. But still, he had to open the door and invite the Duke into the house. Sena felt uncomfortable due to the oppressive atmosphere between the Duke and Dion. However, she tried to remain calm, because this is her home. Hearing the Duke say that he had come to propose to Sena, Dion abruptly interrupted him by answering no. Rashid was indignant at Dion's tactlessness because he was not addressing him. But the guy continued to bicker, and for some time, forgetting that they were in someone else's house, they argued. Finally, Sena's patience ran out, and she reminded the uninvited guests that this was her home. Hearing the heroine say that she would throw them out of her house if things continued like this, they immediately remained silent. Sena was pleased with herself because she managed to show who's boss. Having achieved calm, she turned to the Duke with a question about what his proposal was. The Duke said that the basement of her new house was not in the best condition, and not only the basement. The girl replied that this was expected because the house was quite old. Therefore, the Duke announced that he was going to reconstruct the entire house. Hearing this, Sena began to worry about Ellen because, during these 2 months while the Duke was not around, she would have no one to protect her. Returning to his request, Rashid said that he would like to rent Sena's house during the reconstruction. Dion immediately expressed his disagreement. Although it was not about buying, but about renting, Dion was still against it. Ignoring Dion's indignation, the Duke offered a contract with a monthly payment. He immediately took out the documents and showed the conditions written there. Despite Dion's protests, Sena still decided to familiarize herself with the contract. When she saw the monthly payment amount, she was dumbfounded. The Duke proudly announced that everything was written correctly and that he was going to pay exactly 500,000 rupees every month. Hearing about this, the girl immediately agreed, calling the Duke a precious guest. Rashid was glad that the girl accepted his proposal. Having made her final decision, Sena proceeded to sign the contract, especially since the Duke would be able to continue protecting Ellen while living there. But Dion continued to protest. He insistently asked the heroine not to do this, saying that he could also pay her 500,000, although the girl did not understand why he needed this. Seeing such a violent reaction from the guy, the Duke became interested in what connected Sena with Dion. The heroine answered without hesitation that they were just friends. These words greatly shocked Dion. He turned pale in surprise. The guy was clearly counting on something else. The Duke felt some relief. While Sena did not understand what was happening around her, Dion was depressed by the information that the girl considered him just a friend. Having finished the conversation, the Duke was about to leave, leaving the contract on the table. Heading to the exit, he said that he wanted to give the girl enough time to think everything over, and he also added that she could add her own conditions. Sena was extremely surprised by the Duke's behavior. Compared to how he was when they first met, he behaved much better now. Not understanding the reasons for such drastic changes, Sena decided not to think about it. She began studying the contract. Dion watched with a sinking heart as Sena made changes to the contract. Having finished with the amendments, the girl showed the document to Dion to get his opinion. But the guy was still offended by the phrase that they were just friends. The heroine did not quite understand the reason for his spoiled mood. Suddenly, a guy with an offended voice asked if Sena was really going to sign this contract. Hearing a positive answer, he excitedly asked why she refused that time. It was about a case when the Duke wanted to buy Sena's house. The girl replied that now the circumstances have changed, especially since at that time he insisted on buying a house, but now he just wants to rent it for a while. But Dion was still dissatisfied. He continued to mutter that he himself could lend so much money to Sena. Hearing this, the heroine replied that it was not just about money, she needed a duke. This information greatly shocked the guy. Then Sena explained that it was the Duke who helped Ellen and drove away the thieves who broke into her house. Also, according to a recently overheard conversation, the man with purple hair is going to visit Ellen again. And if the Duke remains in her house, he will be able to help his neighbor if necessary. Sena recalled that it was Dion who said that Ellen would be better off with the Duke. After listening to Sena's answer, Dion realized that it was because of his words that the girl accepted Carlman's proposal. Looking at the guy's upset face, the heroine did not understand why his mood had deteriorated so much. A few days later, the Duke began to actively move into his new home. At this time, Sena was analyzing the view from the window of the house. The girl was pleased that Ellen's house was clearly visible from there. While she was relieved that the Duke would be able to look after Ellen from there, Sena was also perplexed, not understanding why she was so worried about an ordinary neighbor. She had several assumptions about this, the most plausible of which were that Ellen was the main character of the novel, or that Sena felt bad about the fact that her neighbor had to run away from her terrible family. Her thoughts were interrupted by someone's footsteps. It was the Duke. He said that all his things had already been delivered, and the workers, having finished their work, said goodbye to the mistress of the house. After his lordship's subordinates left, the first thing the heroine did was to remind him of the terms of the contract. Hearing the man's answer that he remembered everything, Sena decided to check how true this was. The Duke was dejected that he had to retell this contract for the 100th time, but still he began to list the points written there by the heroine. He listed all 7 points in one breath, and at the end he added Sena's condition that if at least one of these points is violated, the contract will be cancelled. Hearing Carlman's answer, Sena cordially praised the Duke, but such praise did not particularly please the guy. A joyful Aaron, who was happy about the move, intervened in the conversation. However, he had a question. Since the assistant saw Dion for the first time, he became interested in who he was. The Duke replied with a grin that it was Sena's friend. For Dion, these words were like a blow to the head. Barely restraining his anger, Dion greeted the Duke with a forced smile. The oppressive atmosphere between them could be felt a mile away. During this time, Aaron told Sena about the schedule for using the house, according to which the Duke plans to stay in the rented house 1 or 2 days a week, and his nights will be there the other days. Having said everything he had planned to say, he said goodbye and hastily left the house. The girl said goodbye to her assistant in bewilderment. She didn't know how to calm Dion and Carlman down. Sena turned to the Duke, trying to stop the conflict, but he ignored her words. She also turned to Dion with a request to stop the dispute, but also to no avail. Realizing that none of the men were listening to her, she had to directly wedge herself between them to get their attention. In order to separate them completely, she asked Dion to leave, since it was already late. Dion was surprised by such a request, but Sena hurried to send him away so that he could go home and get some sleep. She was angry and blamed herself for bringing these two together in one room. The heroine urgently asked to return tomorrow or in a few days, but suddenly noticed that the door did not open. The Duke came to the noise and asked what had happened. Dion was very glad that the door was stuck and he would not be able to go home. And again, these three found themselves in the same room, at the same table. Sena was in prostration. She did not understand how it was even possible for the door not to open. The Duke clarified that not only the door, but also the windows do not open, which creates the feeling that they are inside some kind of barrier. Dion was extremely pleased with the current situation. Thus, three people sat at a round table, one of whom was happy, the second was dejected, and the third was angry. The Duke and Sena immediately thought that this could be another demon, and taking out the device, the heroine decided to test this assumption. They were shocked when their hypothesis was confirmed. None of them expected this. The stone on the device glowed bright red, which meant that a demon was hiding in the house, but how long he had been there was impossible to determine. Seeing the expression on the heroine's face, Dion became worried and asked if she was okay. For Sena, it was a home filled with treasured memories. She swore to herself that she would protect this place. Sena silently stood up from her seat and headed somewhere. Seeing how the girl hit the window with all her might, the guys jumped up from their seats excitedly. The heroine explained her behavior, pointing out that even after such a strong blow, there was not a scratch on the glass. Which means only one thing. The demon locked them there, since it is easier to devour live prey that is locked up. After some time, the temperature in the room increased greatly. The heroes turned red from the heat and had difficulty breathing. Sena could barely put together a few words. According to the heroine, it was all arranged by a demon. Hearing that this was a rather rare type of demon, Dion asked how Sena knew about it. The girl replied that she read it in a book. It was about a book that he and Dion found in the library. The Duke did not understand what book he was talking about. Then Sena said that that book talked about a demon who likes to steam his victims before consuming them. There was also information about the demon that they found in the Duke's house. Noticing the tense atmosphere between Sena and Carlman, Dion brought them water to cool down a little. Having received cold water, the heroine was delighted. When asked where he found the water, Dion sheepishly replied that he had a few tricks up his sleeve. He showed off his magic with pride. Sena was delighted. A guy created fresh water out of nowhere. The water was tasty and cool. While Dion was drinking water, the girl noticed some kind of symbol, similar to a tattoo, that appeared on the man's shoulder. Having refreshed himself, Dion advised the heroine to also drink before the water warmed up. Sena happily thanked Dion. She immediately drank all the water. After that, she felt better. The Duke was dissatisfied since one glass of water was not enough to refresh him. Dion did not like the guy's ungrateful tone, and he said that if the Duke needed water, he should ask politely. Carlman objected to this. For him, it was humiliating. Before the conflict escalated, Sena interrupted them, reminding them that they needed to focus on finding the demon in the house. The heroine said that according to the information from the book, this demon will not come out until they die from the heat. However, since this was her first time encountering this, she didn't know where the demon might be hiding. All this time, the Duke looked at Sena in admiration. But when they met their eyes, the guy turned away in embarrassment. Then the girl turned to Dion, asking if he knew anything about this demon. The man replied that he knew little about demons, since he had never had to fight a demon. At that moment, Sena noticed that Dion is really strange, because all that is said about him is that he will act like crazy. There are no other rumors about him. Also, although Dion rarely appears in high society, he somehow knows the Duke. Realizing this, she suddenly asked how Carlman and Dion knew each other. Dion replied that he first met the Duke at Sena's house. Carlman answered differently. He said that they had already crossed paths before, and one of his acquaintances said something about him. Dion asked with interest what exactly they told about him. The Duke replied that he had been advised to beware of him. Dion, with an ominous smile, only said that it was clear. Sena got shivers down her spine from such a grin. Having finished the conversation, they went in search of the demon. With each step, the device reacted more and more strongly to the demon. Suddenly, the heroine stumbled. Luckily, Dion caught her before she hit the floor. The heat completely consumed the girl, and she could not even open her eyes. Since the girl was not able to continue on her way, the guys decided to leave her at the wall for now and look around themselves. Despite the fact that one of the clauses in the agreement was a ban on entering other rooms, the Duke suggested that the girl would not mind if they opened this door, since catching the demon was paramount. Dion agreed with him, and together they opened the door to the room. The men entered the room and began a search. Dion began his inspection from the bookshelves. Suddenly he found an old map. The guy, having forgotten that Sina was not with them, turned to her with a question about why that area on the map was circled. Seeing the Duke fidgeting on the table, Dion suddenly asked if he had seen this creature outside the room. Then the Duke realized that Sena was in danger. At this time, an unknown black aura had already reached the girl. Realizing that the heroine was in danger, the Duke and Dion rushed to her. By that time, the demon had already swallowed Sena. However, there was one problem. The demon's body was invisible to the eye, so it seemed that the girl was floating in the air. The Duke, drawing his sword, walked towards her. Assuming that the heroine was in the monster's stomach, the man tried to determine the location of the head. Having calculated the approximate location, the Duke struck, but he missed and only cut off his tongue. At the same moment, the demon regained visibility, but its tongue grew back. Dion also joined the attacks. He directed an ice magic attack at the demon, but the monster skillfully recovered from all the blows. In the end, he managed to escape. The guys ran after him, but were exhausted before they could catch up with him. Dion and the Duke knew that the longer they delayed, the more likely it was that by the time they found the demon, the girl would already be digested. For better results, they decided to develop a plan first. Dion suggested playing on the monster's hunger and making the Duke a bait, and when he opens his mouth to swallow him, Dion uses his magic. Carlman was obviously not satisfied with this plan. But Dion had no more ideas. After thinking a little, the guys found another way out: to blow up the entire house. However, just imagining Sena's reaction, they immediately discarded this option. While Dion and Carlman were busy generating ideas, the Duke accidentally touched the package of salt. As a result, salt spilled onto the demon's footprints. Then the Duke noticed that some kind of reaction was happening. Suddenly, he shouted that he had found a solution. Based on the chemical reaction, the Duke realized that the demon was weak to salt. Looking at the floor, Dion also saw that the monster's saliva turned black as soon as it touched the salt. Therefore, if you sprinkle this on the body of a demon, you will be able to see it. All that remains is to decide how this can be realized. Suddenly, Dion had a great idea, and naturally, this did not bode well for the Duke. The plan, as before, was to make Carlman a bait. Sitting in ambush, Dion waited for the demon to appear. We didn't have to wait long. The plan worked like a charm. The demon took the bait. Just as the demon was about to devour the Duke, Dion attacked him. He shoved a huge packet of salt directly into the demon's mouth. While the monster howled in pain, Dion managed to retreat. Standing further away, he watched the demon's reaction. By that time, the Duke had already risen from the floor and was preparing to attack. Drawing his sword, he delivered one precise blow. This time, the Duke was able to cut off the demon's head. Working together, Dion and Carlman managed to defeat the monster. However, it was unclear what happened to Sena. Concerned, Xion walked towards the demon's body. Coming closer, the guys noticed that the tail of the already dead monster twitched. As expected, the demon had regenerative abilities and had already begun to grow a new head. Dion said that such demons have a core, and the only way to kill such a demon is to remove the core from the body or destroy it. To begin with, Dion immobilized the demon's body using ice magic. He also used magic to force him to keep his mouth open. And as usual, he left the dirtiest part of the job to the Duke. According to his plan, Carlman must crawl inside and rescue Sena. The Duke was not happy with this, but still agreed. Suddenly, the ice canes that supported the mouth broke. Suddenly, the demon woke up. Having come to his senses, he immediately tried to swallow the Duke. Dion did not have time to react before the monster had already swallowed Carlman. At that moment, Dion said with a grin that this was why he told the Duke to hurry up. Having swallowed Carlman, the demon tried to free itself. Then Dion prepared another spell, this time using the element of fire. A moment later, the fire completely enveloped the demon's body. Dion continued to throw magical blows. At the same time, he tried to fetter the movement of the monster so that it would not destroy the house. After some time, the Duke found Sena. At that moment, the demon let out a terrible screech and vomited black liquid. The Duke, together with the heroine, managed to get out of the monster's stomach. The demon continued to tremble convulsively. Finally, uttering a terrible scream, he collapsed to the ground. Having immobilized the demon, Dion headed towards Carlman and Sena. A little mockingly, he turned to the Duke and said that he was late. But the Duke managed to rescue not only the heroine, but also pulled out the core. After the core was separated from the body, the demon disappeared forever. This time, making sure that the monster was finished forever, the heroes breathed a sigh of relief. Sena looked the same as before. She was still unconscious and unresponsive to external sounds. Suddenly, she rushed to hug her and asked for a little more time to sleep. Dion tried to wake her, but to no avail. She only squeezed her hands tighter, squeezing the Duke in her arms. This made Dion extremely irritated, and the Duke felt awkward. Realizing that Sena was doing this unconsciously, Dion calmed down a little. He pressed the girl in his arms and said that she should not hug any weirdos, but instead let her hug only him. The Duke could not understand the reason for such actions, but still did not object. After some time, the heroine woke up in an unfamiliar place. A girl in a maid uniform immediately approached her and said with a smile that the heroine had been sleeping for so long that they began to worry. Seeing Sena's bewilderment, the maid clarified that this was the estate of Duke Carlman, and it was his lordship who brought the girl there. Gradually, the heroine remembered that she had lost consciousness because of the demon. The maid explained that the Duke brought the girl here only because the girl fainted, and there was a doctor on the estate. And upon learning that the servants wiped her while she was unconscious, the girl was shocked. Having finished her report, the maid went to draw a bath for Sena. After taking a bath, the heroine put on a pre-prepared dress and left the room. Seeing Sena in such an outfit, Dion was embarrassed and looked away. The girl's beauty made not only Dion, but also the Duke blush. When the guys asked if she was okay, Sena replied that she felt much better. Then Dion asked if she remembered anything after fainting, but the girl didn't remember anything. Hearing the answer, Dion specified his question, asking if this meant that she did not remember hugging the Duke. The girl's face was distorted in surprise. Realizing that Sena did not remember anything, Dion said that she clung to Carlman quite tightly. Very strong, even too strong. Remembering these events once again, the Duke blushed with embarrassment. Sena was speechless from shock. Then she remembered her dream. It turned out that she had confused the Duke with her blanket, and having learned that she had also muttered in her sleep that she didn't want to get up for school, the heroine was completely dumbfounded. She bowed in panic and asked for forgiveness for her actions. The Duke understood everything and also felt awkward. Having finished apologizing, the girl turned to Dion, saying that he should have stopped her at that very second. Hearing the girl's words that it was most likely disgusting, the Duke became a little upset. Sena, misinterpreting the expression on his face, thought that he was angry. Therefore, she again began to bow and ask for forgiveness. Dion laughed secretly. Trying to change the subject, Carlman invited Sena to stay for dinner. Suddenly, the heroine grabbed the Duke, trying to prevent him from leaving. But realizing what she had done, she immediately removed her hands. The point was that she needed to discuss something with the Duke. It was about demons that had already appeared in the capital twice. Considering the fact that she was involved in both incidents, Sena urgently asked to reveal all the cards. She wondered why all these demons were appearing near her home. But the Duke still could not tell her. He refused without explanation. He just said that he wanted to figure everything out himself. He also clarified that he needs more time to investigate. However, in order to calm the girl down, the Duke promised to tell her everything as soon as he found out everything. And not only her, Dion too. Dion accepted the offer, but continued to pretend that he was not particularly interested. As if sensing that the conversation was over, Aaron knocked on the door. Having finished his speech, the Duke left with his assistant. As they walked down the empty corridor, Aaron tried to ask something with his eyes shining. Finally, gathering all his will into a fist, he asked the question of whether there was any close relationship between the Duke and the mistress of the house. The maids were also delighted at the prospect of a new duchess. However, the embarrassed Duke could not answer this question. At this time, Sena and Dion were left alone. Then Sena, with a concerned tone, asked Dion's opinion, to which the guy replied with an extremely serious tone that he thought that the food would be quite tasty since this was the Duke's house. Hearing this, the enraged heroine clarified that they were talking about demons. to which Dion responded with a laugh that it was just a joke. Sitting down on the sofa, Sena continued to think about how this could happen in the capital. After all, in the entire empire, the capital is the safest place. And all because the most talented magicians, hunters, and scientists joined forces with one goal: to create a protective barrier. And yet the demons somehow managed to get inside. Dion told Sena his thoughts about the Duke not telling them anything. He was sure that this was not due to trust, but something else. For example, with secrets that are already dangerous to even know about. However, even admitting this possibility, Sena was angry, because how could she sit idly by if it was about her house? Dion was pleased with this reaction, because this is exactly the type of Sena he knows. The heroine added that, in addition to everything that has been said, demons are considered the sworn enemies of hunters, and that is why she cannot let everything take its course. While the girl was talking about her intentions to get to the bottom of the truth and destroy all demons, rage, pain, and hatred were visible on her face. So Dion only replied that he understood. Having said this, he stood up from his seat to leave. Sena was surprised because she thought that the guy would also stay for dinner, but he said goodbye, saying that he had no appetite. The heroine decided to stay in order to continue the conversation with the Duke. After the guy's sudden departure, Sena looked after him with her mouth open, not understanding why Dion so abruptly changed his mind about staying. Then, the only reasonable assumption for the heroine was that she was talking about demons. And for Dion, who had never seen them before, they were disgusting creatures, so the guy lost his appetite. But still, the girl was waiting for a warmer farewell. And after such a cold departure, she even thought that Dion might not come to visit again. Sena did not want this meeting to be their last. Suddenly, the girl's thoughts were interrupted by Dion's words that her house was damaged. The heroine was slightly surprised by this news. Then, the guy clarified that the house was damaged quite badly. For some time, the girl digested this information in a stupor. Finally realizing what she was talking about, her face contorted in shock and rage. At this time, the Duke was working in his office. However, all the time thinking about Aaron's words, he could not concentrate on the documents. It was all because of his assistant's long tongue. Suddenly, the headmaid came and said that the guests had gone home. Carlman was disappointed that Sena didn't stay for dinner. Having received the owner's permission, the maid bowed and left. At the same time, other young maids stood outside the door, enthusiastically discussing the Duke's relationship with the heroine. After the maid left, Carlman wondered whether he should marry Sena. He couldn't understand it to himself. He remembered how the girl, in a panic, apologized for the hug and said that she would not touch him again. I imagined that Dion and Sena had a close relationship, so I felt like a third wheel. After much thought, he regretted that he had not made a better first impression. Noticing the strange behavior of his master, the subordinate asked what was eating him. At first, the Duke wanted to deny everything, but suddenly changed his mind and asked James to find out what gifts young girls prefer. With the assistant's assumption that the gift was intended for the girl he was looking for, the Duke quickly agreed, since he did not know how to explain his interest in Sena. And only after these words he suddenly realized that all this time he had never even thought about Ellen. Seeing the Duke's expression, James asked again if it was possible that the gift was for the wrong lady, but Carlman immediately replied that it was for the right one. At the same time, he could not believe that he had forgotten about it. Realizing his mistake, he abruptly stood up from his workplace and headed towards her house. But James reminded that today is not his turn, and, according to Aaron, the Duke has a lot of work to do. Hearing about this, Carlman was furious, but still he had to stay to finish the job. Not noticing anything around, the Duke tried to finish all the documents as quickly as possible. Late at night, hearing a knock on the door, Dion went to answer it. The Duke stood on the threshold. Dion was unpleasantly surprised, but still invited him into the house. The girl was cleaning at the time. She explained that at first it was a complete mess, and everything was splattered with demon drool. Looking around, the Duke asked if anything was broken. Sena happily replied that, fortunately, only the chest of drawers. She also enthusiastically reported that she was able to sell the mana stone they extracted from the demon for 400,000 rupees. And she added that Dion helped her with this. The heroine immediately invited Carlman to take his share, but he refused. Then she turned to Dion and asked if he thought it was a little uncomfortable to sleep, but the guy was fine with everything. The Duke was speechless, having misinterpreted their conversation. But the girl's next phrase, that Dion took a little nap because he was tired while helping her, clarified the whole situation. However, Dion immediately noticed the Duke's bewilderment and began to make fun of him. Noticing the two's casual interaction, Sena assumed that they had already become close. Continuing to grin, Dion told Sena that there was no need to worry as he slept well. The Duke was not surprised by this answer. After all, when the girl suffered from the demon, Dion did not leave her side for a second. Then he looked as if he was ready to destroy any demon that stood in his way. Now he looked completely different. It was even difficult to believe that this was the same person. Sena was glad to hear this, because the room she provided had been empty for more than 10 years. When Dion learned about this, he was surprised, because the room was very clean. Sena said that her grandfather used to live there, but now she cleans it regularly, so the room is in good condition. Upon hearing about this, Dion apologized for the inconvenience caused. The heroine sheepishly replied that everything was fine. Carried away by the conversation, they left the Duke aside. Then Carlman offered to help with the cleaning, since he was also responsible for the damage. The girl was embarrassed to bother the aristocrat with work, but Dion quickly found something for the Duke to do: prepare dinner. Sena tried to stop him, but Dion continued to provoke Carlman with his words. To prove his competence, the Duke agreed. He was determined. Having made a decision, Carlman headed to the kitchen. Standing in front of the cutting board, he didn't even know where to start. Sena was already starting to worry. She offered her help to Carlman. The Duke immediately refused, but the heroine insisted on her own. The Duke, flushed with embarrassment, nevertheless gave in. She said with confidence that she would prepare everything herself. However, the Duke suggested cooking together. An irritated Dion watched all this. The girl started cooking. Remembering that I forgot to add butter, I decided that the order in which the ingredients were added was not very important, and added a huge piece of butter to the pan. While it's cooking, I added a little wine. The Duke turned pale with horror. What the girl cooked was not much like beef stew. The pale Duke asked if this dish should be cooked over low heat, but Sena was sure that it did not really matter, and explained that since they were very hungry, they had to cook on high heat to finish it quickly. Then the Duke reminded her that she didn't even add beef. Realizing that she had forgotten, she rushed to the meat to also add it to the pan. But the Duke stopped her. He insisted that Sena bring a recipe book. Although the girl was confident in her knowledge, she still went for the book. Looking at the strange slurry, the Duke thought with disgust that they would have to eat it. Seeing that the girl had moved away from the stove, Dion asked if she had finished cooking, but Sena replied that no, the Duke just wanted to look at the recipe book. Watching the girl, Carlman realized that she didn't really care when it came to those things that didn't interest her. Following the recipe, the Duke managed to prepare a wonderful dish. Carlman was proud of his work. Even Dion said it looked delicious. Sena admitted that it turned out better than hers. The Duke was embarrassed by so much praise and modestly replied that everything worked out only because he followed the recipe from the book. He set the table and called Sena and Dion to eat before it got cold. Dion was the first to sit down at the table, not forgetting to note that, unexpectedly for himself, the day had come when he would eat the stew that the Duke himself had prepared. But suddenly another plate with an unknown substance appeared on the table. Sena proudly announced that it was a stew that she made. Turning pale with disgust so as not to offend his friend, Dion forced a smile and said that the dish looked good. He dared to try it and even highly appreciated the heroine's culinary masterpiece. Having finished the tasting, they started dinner. This time, Sena was the first to try the dish the Duke had prepared, and her face showed how delicious it was. Dion doubted the taste, but also tried a spoon. However, the food was so tasty that he involuntarily said it out loud. Sena and Dion praised the Duke's culinary skills and devoured the food on both cheeks. Carlman was pleased to hear this. He said with a smile that there was still a lot left in the pan and they could help themselves. The Duke was happy to share the meal with someone else. After all, he usually eats alone, since he has no friends or family. After a delicious dinner, Sena was in high spirits. She sincerely praised the Duke, saying that he was really good at everything. After finishing their meal, the heroes went for a walk, because at night the city comes to life in a new way. Leaving the house, Sena immediately regretted that she had not gone alone. After all, Carlman and Dion, like little children, looked around in admiration, and each time asked what it was and what it was for. When Sena warned them to be careful, as it is easy to get lost here. The men unanimously replied that everything was fine. They were not children. The heroine was thinking about the carpet she had ordered from the store and the list of things that still needed to be bought, while Dion and the Duke were enjoying their walk. Seeing the lamp, the girl remembered that the demon had broken her lamp and she needed to buy a new one. Sena approached the merchant to find out about the prices. But before she could say anything, Zion suddenly pointed to the statue and asked what it was. The seller replied that it was a dragon, and the figurine is called a dragon guarding the mana stone. The heroine did not particularly appreciate the work of art, while Dion was delighted. Having noticed a potential buyer, the merchant immediately began talking about the figurine. Upon learning that it was handmade, Dion admiringly approached to examine the details. Noticing the guy's shining eyes, the merchant told a legend about dragons, which says that they can use magic. Hearing this story, Dion asked how this could be if everyone knew that only demons use magic. Then the merchant spoke about his hypothesis that perhaps the demons are actually dragons, and although people do not like demons, they still use their magic. And in order to give people magic, there had to come a moment when the two races would somehow make contact. And according to his theory, the dragons did just that. After all, in all fairy tales, dragons always behave friendly towards people. Then it is possible that the demons were divided in their opinions. And as a result, some decided to remain demons, since they did not like people, and the rest chose to coexist with people, turning into dragons. Based on all that has been said, the merchant assumed that not all demons are evil and vicious. Dion, seriously analyzing the merchant's words, said that the temple would not approve of such an idea. Sena, on the other hand, did not feel the slightest interest in dragons, since she had never met them. The conversation seemed a little dangerous, so the Duke looked around, hoping that no one could hear them. However, Dion thought it sounded plausible. This phrase greatly surprised Sena, but the merchant was glad that he had found a like-minded person. Dion thought the salesman's theory was quite interesting. He continued to think with admiration about the almighty dragons, not noticing the fierce look of the heroine. Realizing that Dion could no longer be convinced, Sena gave up. She decided to buy this dragon lamp. Dion was incredibly happy, while Sena felt like a mother who indulges the whims of her spoiled child. Suddenly the girl noticed that there were too many people on the street. The satisfied merchant said that most likely it was because of the play, which would take place nearby, and advised him to watch it too. After hearing about the play, Sena became interested. The play was about a girl who married a man only because he paid off all her family's debts. But Ulysses lay motionless in bed and did not react to his wife's words. Then the girl pulled out the blanket and saw that her husband was wounded. She was terrified and didn't know what to do. Ulysses asked Aaliyah to find the one who killed him, since he could not see their faces. At that moment, the maid behind the door announced that her sisters had come to see the master. Isla panicked, because if the ladies caught her in such a situation, they would think that she had killed her husband. Then the young girl decided to pretend to be her husband. Entering the room, the arrogant ladies said that they had just come to check on their brother and decided to check if everything was okay with him. Seeing that the sisters did not understand anything, Isla felt relieved. But suddenly, a man burst into the room, shouting that this marriage should be dissolved. There was a very good reason for this, because Ulysses is in fact Ailey's long-lost younger brother. Sena didn't even like the book, and the play wasn't particularly interesting to her. However, her two friends were completely caught up in this terrible soap opera. The girl invited them without any expectations. She didn't even think that they would like it so much. While everyone was absorbed in the plot, the girl recalled how 10 years ago she watched the same play with her grandparents. That time she was unhappy because she was brought to the theater instead of a toy. The heroine regretted that she had behaved this way then. She thought that she should have smiled more often that day. Noticing the sadness on Sena's face, Dion asked what was wrong. Sena replied that everything was fine and the performance was quite good. But Dion immediately realized that this was a lie. Then the girl decided to change the topic and asked if the guy was interested in killing Ulysses. Dion was interested, but he didn't want Sena to tell everything, because then it wouldn't be interesting to watch further. Sena decided to play a little joke on her friend and pretended that she was going to name the killer. She had not felt so easy and cheerful for a long time. However, all this time someone was watching them and they didn't even notice. Another bright morning arrived. Sena was beside herself with rage. Carlman and Dion brought books to the table and read during breakfast. During this time, the men managed to get along well. Even after putting away the books, they continued to discuss what they had read. They were reading novels from the play they saw last night. Hearing that the heroine was going to the association, the Duke and Dion stood up to accompany her to the door. Hearing their instructions, the girl recalled the days when her grandparents saw her off. From these memories, the heroine involuntarily smiled. For the first time in a long time, she was so happy. Arriving at the guild, Sena found out that Anna was bored. The administrator began to complain that there had been no work at all lately. Sena's face was distorted in surprise, since in the morning Anna herself called her, saying that she wanted to discuss something important. But in reality, it turned out that she just needed to talk to someone. Then Sena remembered that the last time she came in, they had a lot of work to do. Anna replied that this was true, but compared to last year, there was much less of it. And now, when people have sorted out the remaining orders, it is practically empty. The administrator had a presentiment that it would be extremely boring in winter, and that's why she has no work for Sena at all. Then the heroine realized that Anna had wanted to talk about this from the very beginning, since she was sorry that she did not have work for Sena. Sena reassured her friend with a smile, saying that everything was fine, especially since she recently managed to earn a decent amount of money. Anna was happy for the heroine and asked how exactly she managed to earn money. The heroine spoke in detail about her source of income. However, upon hearing the answer, Anna decided that Sena was not all right in her head. More precisely, this is what presumably would have happened if Sena had told it like it was. Suddenly, the girl was lost in her thoughts because if you think about it, the Duke was staying at the heroine's house to protect Ellen. And that man with purple hair said that he would come to see Ellen. Sena suddenly realized that she had forgotten to warn Ellen about the danger. Noticing her friend's suddenly pale face, Anna became worried. Seeing such a reaction to her question about earnings, the administrator worriedly asked whether Sena had taken out a loan or was gambling. But all the options were wrong. Sena reassured her friend, saying that there was nothing like that and she shouldn't worry. Then Anna asked if this meant that the heroine would not take orders for now. Having heard that most likely yes, since she was currently busy, the administrator immediately assumed that it was because of Dion Fravel. She delightedly wanted to talk about the rumors that had reached her, but the heroine immediately stopped her. She said it was better to hear everything directly from first hand. Sena believed that it would be a waste of time to listen to yet another ridiculous rumor. Suddenly, someone called Sena. Hearing the voice, the heroine turned around and looked. It was a hunter with short black hair and blue eyes. Robin was glad that he met Sena. He happily said that he wanted to share great news with her. Coming closer, he showed the heroine some paper. He happily explained in full pants that this was their new order. Everyone except Sena was delighted with this news. She planned to return home as soon as possible. The heroine found herself in a room where a piercing, high, and heartbreaking sound was heard. The policeman, who was trying to calm the crying baby, greeted Sena. Seeing that the girl came to help, he immediately noted that she was very similar to her grandfather, who was also a very kind person. In any case, the heroine was only interested in one thing, what was happening there, and why the police department has become a haven for the lost. The police could not calm the children down. Every single one of them cried. And finally, one of the officers could not stand it and turned to Sena with a request for help. She asked to hand over the child to her. The heroine explained that the child was crying because the man was holding him incorrectly. Having said this, she showed how to hold it. Once in her arms, the child immediately calmed down. One of the police officers praised her for her good job. Sena laughed it off by asking, "Since when did hunters start doing this kind of work?" After some time, through joint efforts, we managed to get everyone to sleep. While the hunters were watching the kids, Robin asked Sena if she had any idea whose children these were. The girl replied that it was impossible to understand this just by looking at the children. Robin suggested that these could be the children of the heroine's acquaintances, for example, friends of her grandfather. But she replied that she had not heard anything like that. Then Robin said that he found one of the children crying on the street, and when he brought him to the police department, there were already 4 of them, but none of the policemen knew how to deal with children, so he had to ask the association for help. But the children's parents never showed up. Considering the fact that the children were left on the street, they most likely will not appear. However, no matter how difficult times were, It is difficult to believe that 5 children could be thrown away overnight. It didn't look like a mere coincidence. Returning home, she continued to worry about the children. At the same time, she calmed herself down with the thoughts that she had already helped in any way she could. Finally, she reached her house. Assuming that the Duke and Dion were waiting inside, she happily opened the door. Entering home, she immediately heard Dion's voice, who said that she was late. However, something was wrong. Looking at the guy, she noticed that he had turned into a child. And not only him, Carlman was also in the form of a child. They themselves did not understand how this happened. The guys said that while they were reading the books, at some point they became younger. Looking at them, Sena couldn't help but laugh. The Duke and Dion were despondent. The funny thing was that they were so absorbed in the novel that they didn't even notice how they became younger. Dion confirmed that this was all true. Sena was touched by the new appearance of her friends. She joyfully invited Dion to take part in some children's beauty contest, but little Dion did not like the idea. Sena continued to ask permission to pat his cheeks at least once. Before his turn came, the Duke asked him to stop mocking and think about the reasons for what happened. Having calmed down a little, Sena began to think seriously. She also remembered the children at the police station. The Duke then suggested that it might be magic, but Dion said that he would understand if it were so. In this case, there is only one option left. This is the work of a demon. According to Sena, there is a demon capable of this, but this is considered a legend since they are as rare as dragons. Another red flag was that this was the 3rd time the demon had appeared near Sena's house. Since this demon was mentioned in Elliot Raffman's book, the heroine decided to go to the library in the morning and reread it again. Dion and Carlman could not return home in such guises. Therefore, Sena invited them to stay in her house for a while. First thing in the morning, the heroine brought baby clothes for the guys. However, due to her haste, she made a mistake with Dion's size. Visually, the Duke looked about 12 years old, and Dion looked about 7. Sena had fun helping Dion get dressed. Suddenly, someone burst into the house. The Duke immediately recognized the man's voice. It was Aaron, who ran to Sena in search of his master. The heroine tried to lie something so as not to give the Duke away, but she was not very good at it. The assistant was worried that the Duke might again get into some kind of trouble, because of which he could be arrested. But Sena tried to calm him down, saying that his lordship would not fall into the same hole twice. Then Aaron happily assumed that the Duke had gone on vacation. The girl didn't even know what to answer to this. However, the assistant did not wait for an answer at all. Having convinced himself that the boss was on vacation, he decided that this was his chance to rest. After Aaron left, the evil Duke came out of hiding. Then Sena suggested simply telling Aaron the truth, but for the aristocrat it was a matter of honor. The Duke supposedly knew that as soon as the assistant saw him, he would die of emotion. Dion began to laugh secretly. They started nagging again, like real children. Sena, watching them, couldn't understand if it was because they had become children. She ended up intervening in the argument and stopping them. The heroine reminded them that they needed to go to the library. Arriving at the library, they began to search for information in the book together. It turned out that they were dealing with an S-rank demon, which is called Reviolt, and has the ability to influence the psyche. According to the book, this demon likes to cast curses just for fun. Those affected by the curse become younger physically and mentally. They are getting younger and younger. And if the curse is not lifted, then death awaits them. Sena was horrified by such prospects. Dion tried to calm her down, saying that everything would be fine with him and the Duke. But these words didn't make Sena feel any better.